Afternoon everybody, Silverbolt here, back for the fourth part in my Horror 101 series of videos. Now, in the last video we looked at the 80s and the 90s, and I said then that we're going to move more into the noughties and the things that probably helped influence the films that came out in the noughties. So one of the things that I'll mention that happened in the 90s was, and I alluded to it in a previous video as well, was we saw the advent of manga and anime films coming into the Western society outside of Japan. Now, these films have been knocking around, and animes have been knocking around Japan for God knows how long. I mean, we saw the kiddie versions come in. We saw things like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and Digimon and what else? Anything else? Dragon Ball Z and things like that. Now, admittedly, when they were brought over from the Western side, they were very much diluted. I mean, if you look at the Japanese versions of even things like Yu-Gi-Oh and Dragon Ball Z, they're very, very different. They were extremely heavily edited, and even parts of the animations themselves were changed to suit Western child audiences. However, of course, Japan didn't just make TV series; they also made films that you could dub as horrors. And of course, because they're cartoons, or because they're animation, you can do a lot more with design, with effects, with things like that. And we did see that come over, and you can class certain ones of them as horrors. City of Evil would be one. And Demon City would be another. The one about the battleship that's infected by demons and weird things like that started coming into the Western societies, and it gave us somewhat of a new branch of horror. One of the things that I meant to cover in another video that I didn't was when horror mixes with other genres. Now, you see advents of horror and comedy mixed into things like spoofs like Scream, which will also lead on to the advent of teen slashers, things like that, but there's another one I'll get to as well. And that was science, and so the one that I want to mention was science fiction horror. And you've seen a few of them. Jason X would be classed as sci-fi horror. The episode of Pinhead, the episode of Hellraiser that was set in the spaceship, Hellraiser's Legacy or something like that, I don't know. That was a horror. One that did make me squirm a little bit and jump a little bit was Event Horizon. That was with Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill, and to me that is an excellent modern day science fiction horror. It's absolutely brilliant, to the point I actually think I bought the DVD. I've got it somewhere. There we go. Now, one of the first, and to younger people who are watching this may be a bit of a surprise, but one of the first science fiction horrors came out in the 70s, and it was the film Alien with Sigourney Weaver and Yaphet Kotto and not Ian McKellen. The guy who played Bilbo in the Lord of the Rings. I know his name. I've seen him in so many things, but I just for the life of me can't remember it. Aliens these days, the Alien films, they're not horrors. They're sci-fi fun films. But when Alien 1 first came out, it was a horror. And it scared people. It really did. Because it's very atmospheric, it's very, very dark. In Alien they do make the classic horror mistakes of going off on your own. But Alien was one of those films that was very, very groundbreaking in what it did. Because it was an out-and-out horror. It wasn't supposed to be a sci-fi show. No, it wasn't supposed to be something like Star Wars. It was a horror film. Aliens 2, again, was in some regards supposed to be a horror film, despite the fact that it had really kick-ass Marines shooting things. But again, and big fight scenes between the Alien Queen and Ripley and the Powerlifter, which is still a classic scene. And Aliens 2 again was supposed to be a horror, but they took away from it by adding the more science fiction-y of big men with big guns element. And Alien 3 took it back to its horror roots. Now, admittedly, Alien 3 came out I believe it was 92. Alien 3 came out, and that took it back to its single alien stalking people. So it took it back to its horror roots, and in the original trilogy, I think officially Aliens 2 is considered to be the worst of them, despite the fact that to most people they're their favourite. Then of course you got Alien 4, you got Alien Resurrection, I've got them all over there, Alien 4, and then AVP, and that gives you another point of Predator. And Predator was again had horror elements to it, but it was more of a sci-fi. And then, of course, because of AVP, because of Alien 2, Predator 2, where you saw the alien's Queen's Skull, you got the whole Alien versus Predator crossover, and they've been milking it ever since with such fabulous titles as Alien versus Predator Requiem. And I believe they're actually making a third one, of all bloody things. If they just go back and do the comics, because the comics were great. But no. So that was the advent of sci-fi horror that we saw. But science fiction horror, it wasn't one that, as a rule, really took off. Because blending sci-fi horror, there's only so much you can do with it before you've got to add the laser gun. Because science fiction, of course, it's unrealistic in many regards. It's spaceships and laser weapons and starfighters and things like that. So it's a lot more unrealistic. Whereas horror, though it can be unrealistic, it happens to people that are much more recognisable. And in Alien 1, they're running around in jeans and t-shirts. So there we go. The noughties. To take it into the 2000s, so 2000 to 2010. Now, that saw, whereas the 80s moved away from the soft porn horror to give us gore horror, the noughties moved away from monster horror. It stopped being the likes of Freddy Krueger. I mean, Freddy Krueger and the likes of Jason Voorhees, I refer of course to Freddy versus Jason, it wasn't a horror, it was a blood action movie. It was a remake. They got rid of there's some people who are scared of Freddy and are scared of Jason. Well, you know what, that's combining two horrible things into one. But I wouldn't class Freddy versus Jason as a horror, neither would I class Jason X as a horror. I would class Event Horizon as a horror, because they're just a little bit silly, and they're obviously remade just so that the studios making can make a little bit of extra more money. So we started moving away from the monster horrors, and we started moving into the human killer horror. And now the noughties really did see the advent of human killer horror. Now, we'd had episodes of such things before, like The Hills Have Eyes, where the killers were human. But, and admittedly, that got a remake itself. But we started to see films like, and bear in mind a lot of the films that have done it have actually been remade. We started seeing things like Wrong Turn, Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, Hostel, Hostel 2, Saw, that's the most I can think of off the top of my head without sitting here for half an hour going, So we'll cover a few of them, right? So we started seeing human horror. Now, we had in things like The Wrong Turn, you had the deformed horror. I mean, so many of these films come out where and people, it makes people terrified to go south of New York, because they're all inbred hillbillies who like to eat people, is the opinion these films give out. So, things like Wrong Turn, where you started seeing the deformed humans, and then you saw things like House of Wax, where it was people getting off on killing people. The Hills of Eyes, again, they were psycho killers that were all inbred and things like that. And then we saw things like Hostel, which was just sick people killing people. And those versions of horror films had a much more sinister and macabre meaning to them, because they were human killers. They were humans just basically satisfying bloodlust. to see another human being in agony, to see another human being being violated bodily and sexually and verbally and things like that. So they appealed to our baser natures, they appealed to our darker natures, and that was the turn that the noughties took. And some films, I mean, Hostel wasn't subtle, it wasn't clever in any way, shape or form. In actual fact, it was pretty crap. But we saw films like Saw come out. Now, Saw 1, and to a lesser extent Saw 2, were really, really good. They were a human killer, but the twists and the turns and the nuances and the endings were really, really good. They were shock horror-y, they were brilliant. Unfortunately, they then decided they wanted to milk them for all their worth, and we got Saw 3, 4, 5, 6, and I believe we're going to get a 7. And they're just crap. But there we go. The noughties also gave us the remakes, and when they started remaking classics such as 13 Ghosts, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, The Exorcist: The Beginning, The Dawn of the Dead, the Amityville Horror, The Omen, The Hills Have Eyes, which I've already mentioned, Prom Night, My Bloody Valentine. And apparently they've also made classics from later eras like The Entity and The Wolfman. And I believe in 2011 they're actually re-releasing The Birds and The Blob. So there we go. You know, we started getting a lot of remakes. Now, for instance, House on Haunted Hill with Famke Janssen as the femme fatale in that film was based on a very old film, The House on Haunted Hill. So it wasn't just 70s and 80s that they started remaking. They made the earlier ones as well. Now, House on Haunted Hill was actually not a bad film. The fact that Famke Janssen was in it doesn't hurt it in any way, shape or form. You know, so they started remaking them because they ran out of ideas. You know, originality has gone out the window. It's so much easier to take something like Friday the 13th, which is getting remade, but without Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. There we go. So they stopped giving originality. Let's just rehash old movies. You know, we don't need big budget, groundbreaking films when we can just remake them. And to my mind, it just stinks of laziness. Because there are original writers out there. There we go. One of the things we also started seeing in the noughties was importation horror. And they started coming from, where else? Japan. And we started seeing things like The Ring and The Grudge. And they're the most well known, but they did bring other films in. Now, The Ring, to me, and so these films in Japan, unlike Western films which have to very much shove it into your face, things like The Ring and The Grudge, they weren't really in-your-face horror. I mean, The Ring didn't. The only part of The Ring that actually freaked me out in any way, shape, or form was when she starts crawling out the telly. I mean, can you imagine watching that in 3D? When she starts crawling out the telly, ugh! That was the only bit that got me. The Grudge, as was said in the last video, did creep the living hell out of me. And what it was in the American version, of course, has Sarah Michelle Gellar in it and Ted Raimi, and it's directed by Sam Raimi. How can you tell a Sam Raimi film? Because Ted Raimi's in it. But there we go. Of course, you can also read the credits. And the Grudge stuck fairly close to its Japanese originator. Apart from one very subtle difference, they slowed down the movement of the girl. And I think that creeped me out even more. The way she moved, that my bones are all dislocated and I'm going to move very slowly, but you're still not going to be able to get away from me because I'm going to get you either way. And you know, when she pops up in the bed and the boy's looking at her and that noise, it's actually called a death gargle. That's the actual terminology for the noise. And that film absolutely freaked the living hell out of me. It really did. I came out the cinema and I was like, okay, I wasn't quite like that. However, I did make one of the girls that came with us cry, because I went, "Bah!" and she started crying, which was very funny for me, and earned me a slap from Philly, and then I had to be all nice and contrite and say I'm sorry. I wasn't sorry, but I still have to say I was sorry, because I kept getting poked from Philly. But there we go. So yes, we started seeing the Japanese bringing in their, well, the Americans and the Europeans bringing in the Japanese films. Now, one of the things that we've started seeing in the noughties as well, and somewhat in the 90s as well, was we started going back. We've come full circle in some regards, in that gone are the days of absolute out and out gorefest that we saw in the 80s, and in some regard the 90s, and in some regard the 70s, to subtler horror. And by subtle horror, I'm referring to films like The Blair Witch. Now, for those of you who've watched my videos, you'll know that I did a video of a film called The Haunting, which was an absolutely brilliant film to my mind. It's one of my favourite films. And it's where a lot of it is done through what you think's going to happen, but never see. What you expect to happen doesn't happen. And it takes it back to that, and you get what, and you know, they're subtler the way they do it. There's not such out and out in your face. Films like The Turning of the Shrew, there's ghosts in that, but not so many. And you know, and films like The Others, which was I thought was very, very good. And going on to the Blair Witch Project, now that was something that was fairly well done, in the fact it was something that was original. You know, it hadn't been told from the point of view, apart from the fact it's a true story, which it wasn't, but people believed it was. Done by the handheld video camera, running through the woods where it's all dark and you don't really see anything until the very, very end, when you see the guy standing in the corner before the other person gets smacked. And that was much more subtle by way of horror, and I think I don't know whether it would scare as many people. Blair Witch didn't scare me. Excuse me, I've been dying to get that out. I just thought it was very impolite, which is why I held it off as long as possible. So it was much more subtler horror, and the Blair Witch was very, very clever in what it did. And owing to its success, I mean, to me, all it did was the dodgy camera angles moving up and down and up and down and up and down. It just gave me a headache. It didn't scare me at all. However, that's not to say that subtle horrors won't scare me, or at least creep me out or anything like that. Because what I watched, and it was actually the inspiration for this series of videos, was Paranormal Activity. It was actually recommended to me by a friend at work, Jaginder. He recommended watching it to me, and I thought it was very, very good. You know, I thought it was extremely well done. I thought it was creepy. I think the only part that really lets it down was the last 2 seconds, when the demon face jumps at the camera. That's the only part I thought let it down. If they'd left it with her having an evil smile on her face and blood on her shirt, it would have been fine. But the fact you can't see very much, and all you really see of the demon is footprints and things like that, well, there we go. Throughout the 90s and the noughties, the other thing we started seeing was teen slashers. And that's teens, you know, teens weren't something that was very, very new, but we started seeing I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream, and they got endless remakes as well. And though they're classed as dark comedies, there's nothing very original in them, there's nothing very scary in them, there's nothing very pointful in any of them. So there we go. And I think why so much in these subtler films has gone back is because, again, as I said in my last video, we've become desensitized to horror films. We don't see them in the same light. Now, if you took something like Hellraiser and showed it to someone from 1910, you know, you'd have them running to the nearest head shrinker. And horror films have done that, and they've done it throughout the ages. There have been certain films that have sparked off pandemoniums. George Wells's, sorry, Orson Welles. The War of, was it George Wells or Orson Welles? No, it was Orson Welles. Yeah, Orson Welles. War of the Worlds. There are people still living in mountains thinking that the rest of the world is overrun by Martians. That had a profound effect. The Birds, such a whimsical title from Alfred Hitchcock, had people terrified of large flocks of birds. The Exorcist took us, and The Exorcist, of course, is one of the most famous ones because of what it did. You know, it sent people into labour, people committed suicide, people are still in therapy because of watching these kind of films, and it does, and things like that do show how horror can influence people. It doesn't matter that it's not real. It doesn't matter that it's imaginary. It doesn't matter that to actually make it, to make some of them believable, you've got to have a huge stretch of the imagination and very much leave your credibility at the door. But it does affect people. I saw it when I was a young child. It freaking terrified me. It doesn't help that I read the book. It absolutely terrified me. The book more so than the film, in all fairness. You know, I wouldn't. I think no. Well, no. The only people who've been to my grandparents' house that isn't my family is Philly. My grandparents' house is a bungalow, and there's one corridor, and it's L-shaped. So you've got the living room down at the bottom, and then you've got the corridor, and all the way at the end of the corridor, on the left-hand side is the bathroom, is the toilet. I wouldn't go down that corridor in the dark. Up until I was about 16, 17, I wouldn't go down that corridor in the dark. And I read it when I was like 12. But no, I wouldn't go down that corridor in the dark because it creeped me out. So it does. So, you know, there is some merit to say that, you know, horror films and horror will influence people. But to say that horror films turn people into killers is stupid. You know, it can exasperate phobias, and it can have effects on people, but not to the degree that people want to blame it. At the end of the day, you could argue, well, me being scared of it when I was 12, and someone going out and killing somebody because they watched a certain film is one of the same thing. No, it's not. Fear is a state of mind. You know, it's a state of purpose. It's not something physical. But to act out a horror film, to take it and go out and kill people because of it, that's a conscious decision. It's a very different thing. So, but yes, horror films do influence. The Exorcist, for instance, I believe I read somewhere, I can't remember where, that during the year The Exorcist released, it saw a huge increase in people going to church. Because it was so groundbreaking. Have we had any groundbreaking films recently? I'd say no. We've had some clever ones, like Saw 1. We've had some scary ones, like The Grudge. We've had some graphically grotesque ones, that, like Hostel. Anything truly groundbreaking? We certainly haven't had anything with the effects of things like The Exorcist or The War of the Worlds or The Birds have had on people. There we go. Horror is a genre that, as I said at the very beginning, is there to shock, it's there to scare, it's there to horrify. Different horrors affect different people. Different people are scared of different things. You know, I mean, I don't know anybody who finds... No, sorry, I don't know anyone really who finds horror films scary. To most people, the idea of hentai, cartoon sex, It's just a bit silly. But I know people who do find themselves. Well, I know one person who does like that. So it's every human being is different. So everybody is affected differently by what they see on TV. You know, okay. This is Silverbolt's channel, so I'm going to mention one thing: Optimus Prime's death in the '86 movie had children leaving the cinema in floods of tears. People were absolutely outraged by it. I mean, now we look at Optimus Prime's death, it's like, is he dead yet? Oh good, he'll be back next episode, don't worry about it. You know, it's nothing new. He dies. We don't, you know, we expect him to die. We know he's going to die. It's what Prime does. You know, the only thing missing from Optimus, you know what Optimus Prime really carries in the back of his trailer? A great big bloody cross. But there we go. But you know, it terrified people when Optimus Prime died. Children were, you know, probably some of them would still need therapy if they hadn't brought him back. So different things scare different people. So it's entirely up to you. Well, it's entirely on your own personality what you find scary. You know, I mean, I have said that to me, Hellraiser's not scary, but The Grudge is. So, but to others, it could be the completely other way around. You know, Hellraiser is scary, but The Grudge is just laughable. It's just the way you work. You know, whichever films work for you. Some films might be scary, some films might not. But horror plays on our instincts, as I said in the very first video, which, if it's all gone to plan, is now about a month since I uploaded it. You know, horror films force us to watch our darkest points. Stop yawning, Simon. Good God, have a coffee. I think I have to actually. I'm very proud of myself. I've been in housework all morning. But anyway, I think I'll leave you on that one. I don't want to spend another 10 minutes going over the same thing. So I'm going to leave you on that one. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I've actually enjoyed making it. I thought it was something very, very different. I thought it was something that I could upload on the way to, as we're getting ready for AA. I've been saving like a dog. And unlike Meatloaf, I have something to show for it other than a fistful of dimes and a car. Fistful of dimes? Yeah. So, I will be spending lots of money at AA. AA is coming, but obviously that is not the point in these videos. But I hope you've enjoyed watching them. Well, I hope you enjoy watching all my videos. Not much point in me making them if people don't like them. But yes, I do believe that now I shall love you all and leave you all, as Barney Stinson is apt to do on several occasions. So for now, this is Silverbolt, signing off, saying au revoir, adios, auf Wiedersehen. Owen, sleep tight.